PR Connections Radio presents.
Welcome to the 15-Minute Mediator Podcast. My name is Nancy Gabriel, and I'm the owner of Mediation Around the Table. As a mediator, I help people in conflict come to their own resolution. I do this by facilitating conversations between the parties and asking questions that require them to actually listen to each other. Candidates for mediation are people who are more interested in coming up with solutions than they are in being right. If you think I might be of help to you in your situation, I encourage you to visit my website, mediationaroundthetable.com, and learn more about the services I've been providing to the Southern Nevada community since 2012. Thank you, and stay tuned for the podcast. Welcome, everyone. And I say everyone with all kinds of optimism. I am really excited about today's topic, and I'm very tempted to sing the old Neil Sedaka song, but I'm going to spare you that. We're talking about breaking up, and that breaking up is hard to do in business. I've started 2 businesses with friends. One ended well, the other not so much. And so I've invited Michelle Hausbeck today to talk about that subject and help take a deeper dive. Welcome, Michelle. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello. Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's always fun chatting with you. I am a business owner. I own Hausbeck Brand. It is a branding agency, and I've been in business since 2009 on my own. Previously, 2007 to 2009, I did have a business partner. Hence, breaking up is hard to do in business.
Yeah. Why is this topic important to you, Michelle?
It's important to me because I think there's a lot of reasons. So being an entrepreneur is hard in general, right? You really have to be built for it. But then going into business, especially if they're friends beforehand, has an added layer of excitement, but also risk. So when I did it, everything seems really good and you never think anything bad is going to happen. And so therefore you don't really set up certain things to prepare yourself in case it does. And it can damage or end the friendship if things aren't discussed and transparent, I think, in the beginning.
Right. And so that's part of the complication of going into business with a friend is the layer of not just business, but friendship. And it's double the risk involved.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about what happened in your situation.
So in 2000, towards the end of 2006, I had my friend had an opportunity for her and I to go out on our own. We both had worked at ad agencies, and she was an account executive, and I'm the graphic designer. So, match made in heaven. We needed both sides of it.
Right.
And so we did. And we had an operating agreement. We were 50-50, which you have to be careful, I think, with that sometimes as well. But especially if you don't have the breakup plan.
So we're going to get to exit strategy in a couple of minutes, but elaborate on why you don't think 50-50 is the best idea.
I think it can be, but the operating agreement has to be written very carefully, because if there are disagreements and there's 2 stakeholders and you just disagree, what do? It's a stalemate.
You have a mediation clause in your operating agreement that says in that event, you resolve it through the help of a mediator.
Yes. The operating agreement needs to be written as such, so there can be a third party that comes into play if there is just a stalemate.
Right.
Well, and also with 50-50, depending, again, how it's written, if one person passes away or is incapacitated and it's written to where the spouse or somebody else on their side, would assume the business responsibilities, it's 50-50. So now you're dealing with somebody you never intended to deal with.
Right. Who may know nothing about the nature of the business.
Right. So having a mediation clause, mediation around the table in your operating, in general, I think would be good, but especially.
And I can provide language if anybody wants, but I want to just jump in here. And a lot of operating agreements or a lot of contracts have a dispute resolution clause, and a lot of them refer to arbitration. And let me just quickly tell you the difference between arbitration and mediation. Arbitration, first of all, is expensive. Oftentimes you're using a retired judge at $7 or $8 or $1,000 an hour, and you're putting the decision in the hands of the arbitrator. In mediation, the parties in conflict make their own decisions, and that's essentially the difference.
Have you ever mediated a business? And I know you do a lot of marriages, but
yeah, many business disputes I've mediated, and I've also mediated, and this sort of dovetails into what I wanted to talk to you about next. I've mediated what I like to call business prenups, which is you're planning on going into business with someone. Let's talk about what that looks like. Who's going to be responsible for what, how you communicate, how often you communicate, a process for resolving conflict, feedback. Are you going to have a weekly meeting? And that the partnership that I was involved with that didn't end well, we had entirely opposite opinions about how to answer a text or an email. Because I'm like, get it done. Somebody wants to know my input. I'm going to give it as quickly as possible. And my then partner was like, I'll get around to it when I feel like it. And that absolutely didn't work for me.
Right.
And we, like you're talking about, did not have an exit strategy. So it didn't end well. What sort of things, Michelle, would you wish you would have had as an exit strategy in your business with your friend?
Well, number one is what we're talking about is that third party, which would have been a mediator.
Right.
Not that this came up, but, written in what if something does happen to the other person, but also just what the exit would look like. How do you split monies? How do you split clients? What kind of communications are allowed on either side? Who would retain, if the business was going to continue, who would retain name rights and, the actual LLC? Were there residual incomes that needed to be paid to the partner that leaves, or however it's dissolved because you're going to finish up the client project or client work? That was a big stressor because neither one of us, one thing we did agree on was we didn't want to leave the client's projects without finishing them. Right. We both had integrity that way.
Good.
But yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I don't even know.
Well, I'm going to give you a few tips right now on the things that I've learned as a paralegal and being involved in litigation concerning, expensive and protracted litigation concerning the ending of a business. My tip number one, when you're starting the business, is choose your lane. Figure out who's better at what. In my business, I was the one that was able to ask clients for money. My partner was very uncomfortable with that. Mm-hmm. So choose your lane. Who's going to be touching the clients versus touching the accounting or whatever the business is? Choose your lanes. My second tip is decide on communication. What works best for you as partners? Do you want to have a weekly meeting? Do you want to have virtual meetings? Figure out how you're going to communicate, and then decide who gets to decide. When you're at an impasse, figure out in whose lane, who has autonomy in that lane, and decide who gets to decide. My next tip is feedback. How are you going to provide feedback to your partner? And again, this is all about communication. And when you do it, talking to each other is one thing, but being brutally honest with each other is another thing. And so I like to say, let's talk about what worked well and let's talk about what needs improvement.
Right.
My next tip, we already touched on, establish a checklist for resolving conflict. Again, having a mediation clause is always good. My penultimate tip, and I just am so excited to get to use that word, is reevaluate annually. Figure out where you're at, what your goals are for the next year. And my last tip, and this is the most important to me, is be accountable and be kind. There's no reason for the person closest to you in business to be the victim of your wrath. So let's work on the communication as nicely as possible, get everything in writing, and have a mediation clause, of course. Those are my tips. What would you like to add to that, Michelle? Or amplify?
I think the communication is a really big one. Well, in general, and I know you're a fan of communication.
You bet.
But it's a skill that needs to be developed to be able to be, honest but still, I don't want nice,
Right. Sure.
Right. I mean, that it sounds so simple, but it's true. I mean, in marriage and friendship and, parent-kid relationship,
Right.
I think there's an art to it.
There is an art to it. Another thing that I had in my business partner, my relationship with my business partner, is I tend to talk a lot, and I tend to talk fast, and I tend to interrupt myself and put phrases in parentheses and all. And he was a deliberate talker, and he would have what I would call pregnant pauses between his statements. And I kept thinking to myself, get there faster, get there faster. But I had to sit back and allow him to communicate in his way, and to be patient, and to have some grace for his method of communication. And I asked the same in return. Any thoughts on that?
That's interesting, because my partner, she was from New Jersey and spoke very fast. And sometimes clients actually couldn't understand her. I had grown used to it because I had worked with her for so many years, and I had to have that conversation with her, which it went fine. I mean, she knew, she was aware. But I too had to learn, how we had very different communication styles.
And so we have to not only understand our own communication styles, we have to learn how to listen to other people. And that stems beyond the business partnership relationship to the clientele. In my mediation training, I took hours and hours of continuing education on learning how to listen.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and there's the listen to hear, listen to respond, right?
Right.
And listening, I was just talking about this with a friend yesterday. Listening is a skill as well. And it's hard sometimes, especially if you're excited or even upset and you don't want to forget. We get older, we start to forget things.
Yes, I'm an interrupter. I'm famous for that. And I justify it, not politely, but I justify it by saying, I don't want to forget what I'm going to say. But
Right.
What that's telling the other person is I wasn't really listening to them. I was thinking about what I was going to say.
Right.
So it's always a good idea to take a moment to organize your thoughts and tell that person, give me a second. I just want to organize my thoughts. And that buys you that extra minute to say what you really need to say in the best way possible.
Yeah. One other tip, if you're able, what I've learned to do is jot down notes, and I'll even say, hey, real quick, if I jot down a note, it's just so I don't forget, because I don't want to interrupt you and I want to listen to you, or on a piece of paper.
Yeah, great tip. Great tip. So as we're approaching our 15-minute mark, would you elaborate on how you can help the people who are listening and how they can get in touch with you?
So I am a brand designer and developer, brand strategist, and in a nutshell, I help businesses create the personality.
Ooh,
just like a person has a personality and a certain look, businesses, brands should have the same thing.
That's a great description. And so if I'm starting a business and I want you to help me zero in on my business personality, how would I get in touch with you?
You can go to my website, housebeckbrand.com.
And it's on the board. Spell
Yep,
it.
or I'm on every social media place there is. So
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, thanks for your input and your insight. I appreciate you. And I want to say go Pack Go.
go Pack Go. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.